Through the fogged glass of an old cabin window, a pair of eyes watched the storm. Not human eyes, but a mother German shepherd's, frozen and pleading in the wind. Two tiny shapes pressed against her side, shivering, waiting for someone who never came. Inside, a Navy SEAL sat in the dark, haunted by names carved into his memory more than by the blizzard outside. He told himself he didn't save lives anymore. But when her paw touched the glass, and her cry cut through the silence, something inside him broke wide open. What happened next would remind the world that even shattered souls can still shelter another. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Winter had a way of stealing sound in Montana. It pressed down on the valley like a weight, swallowing the crunch of boots, the breath of rivers, even the voice of memory itself. Snow drifted sideways across the ridges that overlooked Stillwater County, blurring horizon and sky until all that was left was white and wind. Ethan Cole's cabin sat at the edge of it all, a wooden scar among the pines, smoke rising thinly from its chimney. Inside, the world was small and deliberate. Ethan moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent years surviving on instinct. The room smelled of pine resin, gun oil, and coffee gone cold. His movements were methodical. Clean the rifle, patch the window frame, refill the wood stove, as if he were still in the barracks of his old life, where order was the only thing standing between breath and chaos. He was 38, but looked older in certain lights. A once handsome face roughened by the cold, short dark hair, streaked with gray at the temples, a short beard framing a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. His steel blue eyes had the kind of stillness that came only from seeing too much, the calm after too many storms. 3 years earlier, a mission gone wrong in Kandahar had left a man dead and Ethan alive. That imbalance had followed him home like a shadow. He had left the Navy SEALs with a folded flag, a chest full of medals, and the unshakable feeling that they had given the flag to the wrong man. He poured another cup of coffee, though it tasted like metal. The wind moaned against the glass, its rhythm both familiar and cruel. He liked the silence out here. It gave his ghosts somewhere to breathe. But that morning, the silence broke. It began with a faint scratching, almost lost beneath the howl of the storm. He thought it was a branch at first, swaying against the siding. Then came a whimper, thin, high, and desperate. Ethan frowned, setting the mug down. The sound came again, this time from the window beside the stove. He moved closer, each step deliberate, cautious. When he wiped the frost from the pane, the world outside came into view, distorted, gray, and trembling with snow. And then he saw her. A German shepherd stood pressed against the glass, fur crusted with ice, ribs visible beneath the black and tan coat. She wasn't young, maybe 6 years old, her body built strong but worn thin by hunger. Behind her, 2 small puppies clung to her belly, half buried in the snow. Their ears barely moved. The mother's eyes were what stopped him. Amber, intelligent, and full of something rawer than fear, plea. Ethan's pulse quickened. His first thought was logistics, disease, rabies, contamination. The next was memory, the dogs they used overseas, the way they trusted without question, the way one of them had died saving him. He shut that door in his mind. No, he muttered to himself, not again. But the mother dog didn't move away. She lifted her front paws, pressing them against the window pane. Her claws made small, tired clicks on the glass, Behind her, in the white blur of the tree line, shadows shifted, low and moving with purpose. Wolves. Ethan's jaw tightened. He counted 3, maybe 4. The pack moved in arcs, waiting. They weren't hunting yet, just circling, patient. He knew the look of predators who had time on their side. A knock startled him. He turned to see Evelyn Hart standing in the doorway, framed by the snow that blew in behind her. She was 70, tall but thin, with silver hair tucked under a faded wool hat. Her coat was the color of ash, buttoned wrong near the collar. There was always something slightly undone about Evelyn. Her laces, her sentences, her grief. She had lost her husband 20 years ago, and her son 10 after that, but she never let loss sour her voice. "Ethan Cole," she said, closing the door behind her. "If you ever decide to answer before a person freezes, the whole county might just faint." He gave a small, tired smile. "Didn't hear the knock." "You never do," she said, brushing snow off her shoulders. In her gloved hands was a paper bag, warm from the inside. "Bread. Still good. And some penicillin. You looked sick last week." He gestured to the table, but her attention had already drifted to the window. The dog stood there, still pressed against the glass. Evelyn's lips parted. "Dear Lord." "They've been there a while," Ethan said quietly. She turned to him sharply. "And you didn't let them in?" "They're wild," he said. "Could be sick, could be bait for wolves." Evelyn stepped closer to the window, her eyes softening. "She's not wild. She's desperate. You can tell by the eyes." Ethan didn't look. "I don't do rescues anymore." Evelyn set the bread down, her expression turning sad. "You think not saving them makes the past go away?" He said nothing. She studied him for a long time, her voice gentler now. "Sometimes, Ethan, God doesn't take away our pain. He just sends something to make us look at it differently." He looked up, but she was already pulling her coat tight again, stepping toward the door. "I'll check on you in a few days," she said softly. "Try not to let your heart freeze solid before then." The door closed. Silence returned, except for the storm and the faint sound of claws on glass. Ethan stood still, staring at the bread on his table. His throat tightened. He thought of the dog, her body shaking, her eyes steady. He thought of the wolves waiting in the dark. And then, unbidden, he thought of the last thing his teammate had said before the explosion. "Don't freeze, Cole. Move." He walked to the window again. Snow pressed thick against the glass now, distorting the shape of the mother and her pups. The wolves were closer. Their eyes, yellow and unblinking, flickered between the trees. He knew he should act. Every part of his training told him how. Open the door, control the threat, create safety. But the weight of memory pinned him where he stood. His breath fogged the glass. Through it, he saw her move again. The German shepherd lifting her head, stepping closer until her face nearly touched his reflection. She placed both front paws against the window, her claws scraping softly against the frost. Ethan looked straight into her eyes. There was no fear there, only a plea. And still, he did not open the door. The storm deepened with nightfall, spreading a gray bruise across the Montana sky. Wind clawed at the cabin walls, slipping through the smallest cracks with a whistle that sounded almost human. Snow whipped sideways across the clearing, covering the tracks that had led the German shepherd and her 2 pups to Ethan's window. He sat by the fire, its orange glow painting his face in restless light. The smell of smoke and damp wool filled the room. He was still wearing the same flannel shirt he had put on that morning, sleeves rolled up, calloused hands motionless on his knees. The wolves were closer now. From beyond the glass came the faint echo of movement, the crunch of snow, the low, guttural murmur of beasts circling what they had already claimed. Ethan didn't look. He stirred the fire, forcing the embers to flare, as if light could make him deaf. "It's not my fight," he muttered under his breath. His voice sounded foreign in the empty cabin, but the scratching came again. Slow, weak. The mother dog was still out there, pressed against the glass. Her fur was clumped with ice, her sides heaving. One of the pups let out a soft yelp, a sound so small it somehow filled the whole room. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. "Don't do this, Cole." He'd repeated that phrase 1,000 times in the desert when fear had to be locked behind discipline. But fear was simple. Guilt was not. The phone on the wall rang. An old landline Evelyn had insisted he keep for emergencies. He hesitated before picking it up. "Ethan?" Her voice crackled through the static, thin but steady. "Yeah," he said, his tone flat. "Storm's worse down here. I lost power an hour ago," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You holding up?" "I'm fine." "Fine," she repeated, half a sigh, half a scold. "You sound like every stubborn man I ever met." "Listen, I've been thinking about what I said earlier. About courage." He frowned. "Evelyn, it's late. I know, but you should hear this." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "You think courage means running into gunfire. I used to think that too. But sometimes, Ethan, it's not about holding the line. It's about opening the door, letting something in when you'd rather not feel at all." He said nothing. Only the storm answered, moaning through the receiver. "Whatever's out there, don't let your fear of pain decide its fate." She coughed, a raspy sound that made him wince. "You don't have to be a hero. Just be human." "Evelyn," he started, but she'd already hung up. The dial tone buzzed faintly like a ghost. Ethan stared at the phone for a long time. Outside, the howls grew louder. Deep, rolling cries that rose and broke like waves. The cabin seemed to tremble under their sound. He got up and walked to the window. The snow was thick, but he could still make out shapes. The German shepherd stood trembling, her body angled, protectively, over the pups. Her fur bristled as the wolves circled. 3 of them now, maybe 4. Their eyes gleamed like coins caught in lightning. She barked once, a sound more defiance than strength, and they hesitated, calculating. Ethan's hand hovered near the rifle propped by the door. The weight of it was familiar, dangerous. He had promised himself never to touch it again. The last time he fired a weapon, it had cost someone else their heartbeat. He whispered, "It's not my fight." Again, but it came out hollow this time. The storm swelled, drowning everything in white. He saw one of the wolves leap forward, testing her defense. The shepherd lunged back, snapping, but her front paw slipped in the snow. She fell sideways, scrambling to get up. One of the pups whimpered, a piercing, desperate cry that sliced straight through the blizzard. That sound cracked something in him. Ethan grabbed the rifle. His boots hit the floor like thunder. He didn't think. The door slammed open, and the storm swallowed him whole. The cold struck him like a wall of knives. Wind tore at his jacket, snow blinding his vision. He could barely see the tree line, just the blur of motion. Wolves closing in, teeth flashing. He fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked through the storm like lightning. The pack froze, then scattered, gray ghosts vanishing into the trees. Ethan ran. His boots sank knee-deep in snow as he reached the shepherd. She was on her side, panting, her eyes half open but alert. Her puppies huddled close, shivering violently. "Easy now," he murmured, lowering the rifle and kneeling. "It's okay." She didn't trust him. He could see that in her trembling. But she didn't resist either. Her eyes followed his hands, reading him, weighing him. Slowly, he slid his arms beneath her, lifting her weight against his chest. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and cold. The pups followed instinctively, pressing against his legs as he carried her toward the cabin. He kicked the door shut behind him, locking out the wind. The silence that followed felt unreal. The shepherd's breath rasped in his arms. He set her down near the fire, laying her on an old blanket. The pups immediately climbed over her, one nudging at her chin, the other whining softly. Ethan crouched beside them, his chest heaving. His fingers trembled as he reached for the smallest puppy, its fur barely warm, its eyes unfocused. He rubbed it gently, letting the heat of his palm spread through its tiny body. The mother lifted her head, watching him. She didn't growl. For the first time, her gaze softened. "Yeah," he whispered, half to himself. "You're safe now." The fire popped, throwing sparks. Steam rose from the melting snow on his sleeves. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had once held weapons, dragged bodies, closed eyes. Now they cradled life instead. Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhaustion and something unfamiliar washing over him. Not relief, not guilt, but warmth that hurt in its own way. The shepherd's breathing steadied. The pups began to nurse. He stared into the fire until his eyes stung. Evelyn's words echoed in his head. Sometimes courage isn't holding the line, it's opening the door. And for the first time in years, Ethan realized he had done both. Morning came slow and reluctant, light spreading through the snow like a secret too fragile to be told. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the low groan of the pines, in the brittle hush of air that seemed afraid to move. Inside the cabin, warmth had returned in uneven patches. Near the stove, over the blanket where the mother dog and her pups slept, and faintly within the man who had once sworn never to feel anything again. Ethan Cole sat on the floor beside the fire, sleeves rolled up, steam rising from the kettle at his side. He worked quietly, as if the world might shatter if he spoke too loud. The German shepherd mother lay curled on an old flannel blanket, her body trembling in waves. Her fur, now drying, revealed thin scars around her neck, the kind left by wire or rope. He knew those marks. They spoke of confinement, of fights endured without choice. He dipped a cloth into warm water, wrung it out, and began cleaning the dirt and blood from her side. "You've seen worse, haven't you, girl?" he murmured, his voice gentler than he expected. The dog's breathing steadied, her eyes flicking open. Amber, alert, but calm. She didn't pull away when he touched her. In fact, she leaned slightly into his hand. That small gesture, trust, tentative, but real, made something tighten in his chest. He found a roll of gauze in a tin box, the kind every soldier kept long after they stopped wearing uniforms. As he wrapped her foreleg, the firelight brushed across her fur, turning the black patches to gold. "You need a name," he whispered, thinking aloud. "Something steady." He paused, staring into her eyes. "Luna," he said finally. "You look like a creature who finds her way by moonlight." The dog's ears flicked at the sound. Luna. It felt right. The two puppies, small bundles of dark fur and clumsy legs, crawled across the floor toward his boots. One, the bolder of the pair, bit the hem of his pant leg, tugging with determination far larger than its size. Ethan chuckled softly, the sound startling even himself. "All right, little soldier," he said. "You'll be scout." The other pup, smaller, quieter, content to watch her siblings' chaos before joining, earned a smile. "And you, Ivy, you're the thinker." Scout yipped as if proud, while Ivy stumbled into her brother and tumbled sideways into Ethan's lap. He caught her with one hand, lifting the pup's tiny head with a finger. Her fur was still damp, her eyes barely open, but her heartbeat was strong beneath his touch. He didn't realize he was smiling until Luna's gaze met his again. Not fearful this time, not desperate. Something else. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude. He poured some water into a shallow bowl, then found an old can of beans and a half loaf of bread. He broke the bread into crumbs, soaked it, and placed it near the pups. They sniffed, then began to eat in clumsy gulps. The sight was ridiculous and perfect. Two small lives fighting the world with milk teeth and stubbornness. Ethan sat back, feeling warmth spread through the cabin, through his chest. A knock came, soft, uncertain. He glanced at the door. For a moment, he thought of the wolves again, but then a familiar voice called through the wood. "You still alive in there, Cole?" Ethan smiled faintly and opened the door. Evelyn Hart stood outside, wrapped in a thick shawl, cheeks pink from the cold. Her breath misted in front of her face. "Morning," she said, peering past him into the cabin. "I saw the smoke. Thought I'd check if you'd frozen or finally made friends with something that bites." "Come in," he said, stepping aside. She entered carefully, stamping snow off her boots. Her gaze fell on Luna first, the wounded shepherd lying by the fire, her pups tangled beside her. Evelyn's hand rose to her chest. "Oh," she breathed, eyes softening. "Well, would you look at that?" Ethan shrugged, pretending it was nothing. "Found them last night." "Found them?" she repeated with mock suspicion. "Or they found you?" He didn't answer. Evelyn smiled knowingly and crouched beside the blanket. "She's beautiful," she whispered, reaching out a wrinkled hand. Luna sniffed her fingers, then allowed the touch. "And these two," Evelyn added, her voice breaking into a laugh as Scout began chewing on her shawl fringe. "These two are trouble waiting to happen." Ethan smirked, sitting back on the chair near the fire. "Already are." For a long moment, neither spoke. The crackle of burning pine filled the room, the light dancing across their faces. Evelyn watched Ethan quietly. The man who had spent years building walls around himself, now sitting with a puppy in his lap, smiling like he'd forgotten he knew how. "You know," she said softly, "I was wrong yesterday." He raised an eyebrow. "That's new." She chuckled. "I said courage was opening the door, but maybe it's also keeping it open." He didn't reply, but his hand rested on Luna's back, slow and steady, and that was answer enough. Evelyn straightened, brushing snow from her shawl. "I'll bring some proper food for them later," she said, "and some milk. These two need more than old bread and beans." As she turned to leave, she paused at the door, watching him a moment longer. Ethan was laughing quietly now, his head bowed as Scout gnawed on his sleeve. It was a soft, unguarded sound, the kind Evelyn hadn't heard in this house in years. She smiled, her voice low, but sure. "Maybe," she said, The war didn't take everything from you after all? Then she stepped out into the cold, closing the door behind her. Ethan sat for a long time after she left. The fire snapped. The pups slept, warm in their mother's fur. Outside, the world was still white and wild, but inside, there was something new, a fragile kind of peace that didn't feel borrowed. He reached for the small leather notebook on the table. It was dusty, its pages untouched for years. He flipped to the first blank sheet and stared at it for a while, unsure what to say. The pencil felt heavy in his hand. Then, without thinking too hard, he wrote, "I'm not alone anymore." He looked at the words, almost disbelieving they'd come from him. Luna stirred in her sleep, the pups sighing softly beside her. Ethan closed the book, leaned back, and let the sound of their breathing fill the silence that used to belong to ghosts. Night returned to the mountains, heavy and black, pressing down on the cabin like a weight. The storm had ended, but cold lingered in the bones of the valley. Ethan had stacked extra logs into the stove before dusk, making sure Luna and her pups would stay warm. The fire glowed deep orange, breathing soft shadows across the wooden walls. Luna dozed beside the hearth, her body curled protectively around Scout and Ivy, who slept in a tangle of small paws and twitching dreams. Ethan sat at the table writing. The notebook lay open, the words uneven but alive, traces of thought returning after years of silence. His pen scratched softly across the page. "She trusts me. Maybe that's enough for now." He closed the book and leaned back, letting the crackle of fire fill the room. Outside, wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of snow and sap. But inside, another sound began, faint at first, like the sigh of an old house, then growing sharper, a hiss. He frowned, glancing toward the stove. The flames burned lower, dimming to a sullen red. He rose and opened the iron door slightly. A rush of smoke billowed out. "Damn it," he muttered, coughing. The chimney must have clogged again. Ice sometimes sealed it overnight. He moved to open the window, but the latch stuck. The smoke thickened, curling up from the stove, black and oily. Within minutes, the air turned heavy. Luna stirred, ears twitching. Ethan's eyes watered. He tried the door, but it resisted, swollen from the damp and warped by cold. The smoke rolled higher, swallowing the ceiling. His chest tightened. He stumbled back, coughing harder now. "It's fine," he gasped, half to himself, half to the panic pressing in. But his balance faltered. The world blurred into gray. Luna was on her feet now, barking sharply, her voice slicing through the haze. The pups squeaked, confused but alive. Ethan dropped to his knees, trying to crawl toward the door. His fingers grazed the handle before darkness surged over him. The cabin fell silent except for the low roar of smothered fire and the sound of Luna's frantic movements. She barked again, louder, desperate, then lunged toward Ethan. Her jaws caught the sleeve of his flannel shirt. She pulled, muscles trembling. The fabric tore, but she didn't stop. Smoke bit into her lungs. Her eyes streamed, her throat rasped. She barked again, a harsh cough between each sound, as if commanding him to rise. Scout and Ivy joined the chaos, their tiny bodies darting around her legs, barking in sharp high notes. They didn't understand danger. They only understood their mother's urgency. Together, their noise filled the cabin, a chorus of life refusing to go quietly. Luna adjusted her grip, this time biting deeper into his sleeve near the wrist. She dragged backward with all her weight, claws scraping against the floorboards. Inch by inch, she pulled him toward the threshold. When she reached the door, she rose on her hind legs pawing at the latch until it shifted just enough for air to seep through. The cold rushed in, sharp, clean, saving. Ethan's body stirred, reflexive gasps filling his lungs. He coughed violently, then slumped again, half-conscious. Luna barked, one final burst of sound, then pushed against the door with her shoulder. It gave way, swinging open to the night. She gripped his sleeve again and hauled with a strength that should not have been possible for an injured animal. Snow met them like water, hissing as it touched his heated skin. She pulled until his head cleared the threshold, until the frozen air found his lungs. Only then did she collapse beside him, sides heaving, eyes half closed. The mountain wind carried the smoke away. The stars glowed faintly above, pale and distant, but there. Far below, in the valley, Evelyn Hart sat by her window. She had been unable to sleep since the wind shifted. When she saw the thin ribbon of black smoke twisting unnaturally against the night sky, her heart clenched. She reached for her phone. No signal. She stared at the slope, whispering a prayer to the dark. "Please," she said, her hands trembling around her rosary. "Watch over them." Hours passed that way, her lips moving, the storm whispering outside, and the mountains holding their secrets. At dawn, the smoke stopped. Back on the ridge, Ethan opened his eyes to the taste of ash and snow. His head pounded. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. The air burned in his chest, but he was breathing. That alone felt like a miracle. Then he saw her. Luna lay pressed against his side, her fur damp, her breaths shallow. Ash streaked her muzzle, and her front paw bled where she had scraped it raw on the floor. Her eyes, half-lidded but awake, met his. There was no fear in them, only calm. She had done her part. That look said it all. "Hey," he whispered hoarsely, reaching out. His fingers brushed her head, the fur rough under his touch. "You saved me." His throat tightened. He had said those words once before, to a man who hadn't lived to hear them. But now, they came out differently, softer, true. He looked at the pups nestled against her belly, still asleep, untouched by smoke. Scout twitched in his dream, one paw lifting as if chasing something invisible. Ivy stirred, yawning, then pressed closer to her mother's warmth. Ethan turned his gaze toward the cabin. The door hung open, smoke trailing faintly from within. The air inside would need to clear, the chimney to be fixed, the floor to be scrubbed. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the quiet rise and fall of Luna's chest beside him. He sat there for a long while, snow melting slowly in his hair, his hand never leaving her head. "Luna," he murmured again, his voice breaking. "You really saved me this time." The sun crept over the ridge, washing the cabin in pale gold. Steam rose from the snow around them, turning the air into silver mist. The smoke inside the house had thinned, but in Ethan's chest, something heavier, something years old, had finally begun to lift. Early spring in Montana arrived like an apology, hesitant, trembling, unsure if it was welcome. Snow still clung to the pines, yet the rivers beneath began to stir, whispering of thaw and danger. The sun shone thinly through the clouds, and the world around Ethan Cole was melting in more ways than one. It had been 3 weeks since the fire, and the night Luna had dragged him from death's edge. The chimney was fixed now, the air clean again, but something inside Ethan had shifted. He moved differently, slower, careful, as though every gesture carried meaning. His eyes, once fixed on ghosts, now lingered on the small things. The wag of Scout's tail. Ivy's cautious steps. The way Luna always waited for him to open the door first, as if to ask permission to trust again. But her health was faltering. The smoke had scarred her lungs, leaving her weak and coughing. She still guarded her pups with fierce love, yet sometimes her breath caught and her body shook. Ethan had done all he could, cleaned her wounds, fed her well, kept her warm, but he wasn't a vet. He looked at the road map, spread across the table, a trembling line drawn between his cabin and the small animal rescue center in Billings, nearly 70 miles south. He stared at it for a long time before whispering, "It's time to get you help." By noon, he packed the truck. The engine complained before rumbling alive. He wrapped Luna in an old army blanket, tucking Scout and Ivy beside her in a small crate lined with towels. She looked up at him, eyes tired but trusting. He stroked her head gently. "Hang on, girl. Just one more road." The tires crunched over the thawing ground. The snowbank shrank as they descended the ridge, water running in silver veins down the roadside. Ethan drove slowly, his hand tapping the steering wheel to calm himself more than the engine. Halfway down the trail, he saw the river, the still water, still half frozen, winding through the valley like a vein of glass. A thin bridge crossed it, barely more than wooden planks and rusted bolts, slick with meltwater. He stopped, stepping out to test it. The boards creaked, but held. "Easy," he muttered, climbing back into the truck. Luna lifted her head, watching him. "We're fine," he said. They weren't. Halfway across, the tires hit a patch of ice. The truck skidded, fishtailing. Ethan gripped the wheel, heart pounding. "Come on, come on." But the rear tires slid off the plank, the sound of splintering wood snapping through the valley. The truck lurched sideways and slammed against the railing. The ice beneath cracked. "Hold on!" he shouted, grabbing the crate and shoving it toward the passenger door. He flung it open, snow and water rushing in. Scout tumbled out first, whining, Ivy clinging to his back. Luna barked once, sharp, commanding. Ethan turned to reach her, but the bridge groaned again. "Go!" he yelled. She didn't move. Her eyes locked on his, the same look she'd given him the night of the storm, when he hadn't opened the door. Only now, the roles had reversed. He lunged, grabbing her collar, but the ice beneath them gave way. Water surged through the cab, icy and black. Ethan's breath vanished as he fought against the current, his boots slipping on broken boards. He caught the edge of the truck door, hauling himself up, gasping. Luna wasn't there. "Luna!" he shouted, scanning the river. The water roared beneath the ice, shards of it glinting under gray light. Then he saw her, struggling, her head bobbing between currents, the blanket still tangled around her. He waded into the freezing water, every step slicing through him. "Luna!" he yelled again. She paddled weakly, eyes finding his. For a heartbeat, they were close enough to reach. Then the current tore her away, downriver, under the broken ice. "No!" Ethan plunged forward, but the current seized him too. He grabbed a branch jutting from the bank, dragging himself onto the frozen edge. His fingers burned with cold. His breath came in shallow bursts. He looked down the river, where the dark water twisted out of sight. "Luna!" Only silence answered. By the time rescue arrived, summoned by a passing rancher who'd seen the wreck, the truck was half submerged. The pups were found shivering under a bush near the bank. Ethan sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at the river. his face pale, eyes unfocused. At the hospital later that night, the world smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. Evelyn arrived in her old green coat, her silver hair tucked under a knit hat. She looked older under the fluorescent lights, but her eyes held that same quiet strength. She found Ethan sitting by the window, his right arm bandaged, gaze fixed on the snow falling outside. "They said you're lucky," she began softly. "You and the pups." Ethan didn't turn. "She didn't make it." His voice was hoarse, raw. "She saved my life, and I still couldn't save hers." Evelyn sat down beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "You can't keep fighting what's already been fought," she said gently. "You did what you could." He shook his head. "No, I should have driven slower. Should have waited for the road to clear. His words fell apart. He looked out the window again, watching the flakes drift past the glass. "I lost another one, Evelyn. Another soul that trusted me." She reached over, resting her thin, cold hand on his. "Ethan," she whispered, "love doesn't always mean saving someone. Sometimes it just means being there when they need you most." He didn't answer. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger, tired, hollow, eyes full of something that wasn't grief alone, but memory. The snow outside softened everything it touched, even the scars on the glass. When night came, Evelyn left quietly, promising to bring the pups home in the morning. Ethan remained by the window. The hospital lights dimmed, and only the wind could be heard, tapping faintly against the panes. By dawn, he couldn't bear the silence anymore. He drove back to the river, alone. The water had calmed, a slow, glassy mirror beneath the weak sun. He stood at the edge, boots sinking into thawing snow, and called softly into the wind, "Luna!" His voice echoed down the valley, fading into the trees. Only the river replied, whispering beneath the ice, carrying her name away. 4 days after the river claimed Luna, the thaw deepened. The valley began to hum again, the sound of dripping ice, rushing water, and crows returning to the pines. Ethan Cole hadn't spoken much since that day. He split wood, fed the pups, mended the broken steps outside the cabin, but it was all motion without meaning. Scout had grown louder, more restless, while Ivy clung to his shadow, quieter than ever. Sometimes, when the wind rose, Scout would bark toward the river, and Ivy would sit beside him, ears tilted, as if listening for a voice neither could explain. Ethan avoided the river at first. He couldn't stand the thought of it, that wide, cold mirror that had swallowed too much. But grief, like a tide, pulls the living back, whether they want it or not. On the 5th morning, with the sun breaking through mist, he took the trail down. The path was slick with meltwater. The world smelled of earth and iron. Scout and Ivy trailed behind him, their paws sinking into soft ground. The river had shrunk to half its winter size, but its current still carried strength beneath the skin of ice. Branches and debris tangled near the shore, remnants of winter's wreckage. Ethan crouched there, scanning the edges, hoping for something. A sign, a shadow, a miracle. Instead, he found metal. It was wedged in a knot of roots where the flood had torn away the bank. A thin silver collar, its surface scratched and darkened. He reached into the icy water and pried it loose. The metal was cold enough to sting. On the inner curve, words had been etched, worn but readable. Property of Dr. Amelia Hart, Veterinary Corps, 2008. He turned the collar over in his hand, his mind racing. Hart. The name hit him with a strange echo. Evelyn Hart. He wiped the dirt off the inscription again, staring at the date. 2008. 17 years ago. That was before Luna could have been born. Unless she'd been bred, trained, passed through hands the way military dogs often were. He slipped the collar into his coat pocket and looked toward the hills, where Evelyn's small cabin sat like a prayer in the distance. By evening, he was standing at her door. The sky burned with pale gold, the kind that meant the day was trying to forgive itself. Evelyn answered slowly, her frame small and stooped beneath a knitted shawl. She looked tired, though her eyes still held their gentle steadiness. "Ethan," she said softly, "you look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," he replied, holding out the collar. "Found this by the river." She took it, her old hands trembling slightly as she turned it over. Her breath caught. For a moment she said nothing, just stared at the engraving as if reading her own name carved into the past. Then her lips parted. "Amelia?" Ethan frowned. "You know her?" Evelyn's eyes glistened, unfocused. "She was my daughter." Her voice was thin, stripped of all its usual calm. She served as a veterinarian with the Army Veterinary Corps, disappeared during the flood in Kentucky, 2008. They said her truck was swept away. They never found the body. The silence between them deepened, heavy with the smell of wood smoke and rain. Ethan looked at her, the lines of her face carved deeper by memory. "This was hers," he said quietly. "Luna must have belonged to her." Evelyn nodded slowly, tracing the inscription with a fingertip. Amelia trained a German Shepherd back then. Said she was the brightest dog she'd ever met. Saved lives in Iraq. After the war, she wanted to bring her home, but the flood came first. Her voice broke. "I thought I'd lost both of them." They sat together by the fire, the pups curled near their feet. Scout chewed a stick as if the world hadn't changed, while Ivy lay quietly on Evelyn's slipper. Outside, the wind carried the smell of thawing earth. Ethan's eyes were fixed on the flames. "I don't believe in coincidences," he said at last. "She found her way back here, Evelyn. Maybe not to where she started, but close enough." Evelyn smiled faintly through tears. "Maybe that's how grace works," she murmured. "Not as rescue, just return." For a while, they didn't speak. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the shelf and the soft breathing of the dogs. Then Evelyn said, "I think Luna was trying to come home, and in her way, she did." Ethan stared into the fire until the flames blurred. "She saved me," he whispered. Maybe she was saving her memory too. Evelyn reached over and placed her hand on his. "You both saved each other," she said gently. That's what Amelia would have wanted. When he left, night had settled over the valley. The collar rested in his pocket, its metal warm now from his touch. He walked back along the dirt road, the sound of his boots mixing with the river's steady murmur. Scout and Ivy followed close behind, their shapes small against the moonlit fields. At the bend, where the trail met the water, he stopped. The moonlight rippled over the surface, silver and shifting. He took the collar from his pocket, ran his thumb once more over the name, and then knelt, lowering it to the water. "I'll take it from here," he whispered. The current caught the collar gently, spinning it once before carrying it downstream, toward whatever waited beyond the bend, where the ice had broken and the sky began again. Ethan watched until it vanished. Then he turned back toward the cabin, the sound of the river fading behind him like a promise kept. Spring unfurled across Montana like a slow breath, carrying with it the sound of dripping roofs, thawing soil, and the distant call of birds returning to old routes. The snow had retreated to the mountaintops, leaving behind glistening patches of green where the first shoots of grass struggled to stand. The cabin, once cocooned in silence, now echoed faintly with life. The shuffle of small paws, the creak of boots, the hum of fire that burned only for warmth now, not survival. Ethan Cole sat on the porch, mending an old leather leash with thread that barely held. His hands were rough, the scars across his knuckles silver under the morning light. Scout lay at his feet, gnawing on a piece of wood, while Ivy rested her head on his boot, eyes half closed. They had grown fast, still small, but stronger, their coats thick and glistening. The sight of them always drew a faint, weary smile from him. He had begun speaking to them more often, sometimes without realizing it. "Your mother would have been proud," he said softly, watching Ivy lift her head at the word mother. Evelyn had been visiting daily since the thaw. Her steps were slower now, her joints protesting the climb up the trail, but she refused help. She said walking kept her memories from gathering too much dust. That morning, she had brought a small loaf of rye bread and a folded photograph. When Ethan opened the door, she handed it to him with care. It was a faded picture, a young woman in uniform, dark hair tied back beneath a cap, smiling beside a German shepherd whose eyes shone with the same quiet focus Ethan had once seen in Luna. The name patch read, Dr. Amelia Hart. "She looks like her," Ethan murmured. "She trained her," Evelyn said, her voice soft but steady. "Amelia always said that dog understood silence better than most people understood words." Ethan traced the photo's edges with his thumb. "She found her way back to you in a way." Evelyn nodded slowly, eyes glassy. "And maybe to you too." He didn't answer. Words felt too small for what had been lost, and even smaller for what had been returned. Later that evening, when Evelyn had gone and the cabin fell into that gentle, late spring quiet, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sun sank low, turning the river to bronze. Ethan lit a lamp and poured himself coffee gone half cold. Scout stirred by the door, ears perking. Then Ivy began to whine, a soft, uncertain sound. "What is it?" he asked, setting down the cup. Then came the barking, sharp, urgent, not frightened, but calling. Ethan's heart jolted. He moved to the window. The light outside was dim, the kind that blurred edges between what was real and what was memory. At first, he saw only mist along the river bend, then movement. A shape staggering through the grass, dark and wet. His breath caught. He opened the door, stepping out into the damp air. The pups bolted past him, bounding through the mud. And there she was, Luna. Her fur was matted, streaked with river silt, her gait uneven. One front paw dragged slightly, but she stood tall. Her ribs showed, her eyes sunken, yet in those amber eyes burned the same steady fire. She paused when she saw him, head tilting, as if making sure he was real. "Luna," he whispered. She limped forward, each step trembling with exhaustion. Scout reached her first, yelping and circling around her legs, while Ivy pressed herself against her side. Luna lowered her head, licking each of them once, then lifted her gaze to Ethan. For a moment, everything else fell away. The mountains, the river, the ghosts. There was only the woman's dog and the soldier who had lost and found everything through her. He knelt in the mud, reaching out. She closed the last few feet between them, and pressed her head against his chest. Her fur was cold and rough, but he didn't care. He wrapped his arms around her and let the warmth of that moment undo years of silence. When Evelyn arrived the next morning, she found them all asleep on the porch. Ethan sitting upright, Luna's head resting in his lap, Scout and Ivy curled against her stomach. The sunrise painted them in pale gold. For a long moment, Evelyn just stood there, her old eyes filling with tears she didn't wipe away. Then she stepped forward, kneeling beside Luna. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, running a trembling hand along the dog's neck. There, beneath the dirt and tangled fur, was a faint mark, the ghost of where the metal collar had once sat. Evelyn's breath shuddered. "You came home, didn't you?" Luna's tail thumped weakly once, twice, and Evelyn broke down, pressing her forehead against the dog's neck. Ethan stirred awake, his voice hoarse. "She found her way back," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded through tears. "And so did you." He smiled faintly, eyes wet. He sat back, pulling the pups closer. Luna still nestled against him. His voice cracked when he spoke again. "She's not just a dog," he murmured. "She's a bridge between everything I lost and everything I have left." The morning light grew stronger, chasing the mist down the valley. Birds rose from the pines, and the sound of the river below returned. Softer now, almost kind. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing in the smell of earth and fur and smoke. For the first time in years, he felt like the world wasn't ending, just changing. He held Luna's head gently in his hands and whispered, "You found your way home. And I guess I did too." Summer arrived quietly that year, without fanfare, as if the land had decided it had seen enough storms. The pine needles shimmered beneath long stretches of sunlight, and the valley, once all ice and shadow, now glowed with green and gold. Ethan Cole stood outside the cabin he had once treated as a bunker, and now as a beginning. The roof still carried the faint scars of winter, and the old wooden walls leaned just slightly toward the river, as though listening. He was fixing the window, the one by the stove, the same pane of glass that had once separated fear from mercy. The frame was weathered and splintered, its edges soft from years of cold and heat. He ran his thumb over a thin crack that sliced across the lower corner, the mark of that winter night when Luna's paw had pressed against it. The glass caught the light, flashing briefly like a heartbeat. He could have replaced it entirely, but he didn't. Some things weren't meant to be erased. Inside, Scout and Ivy darted across the floor, chasing the sunlight that fell through the open door. They were nearly grown now, though Scout still carried the swagger of a pup. Loud, fearless, tail always moving faster than thought. Ivy was quieter, graceful, with the patient eyes of her mother. Luna herself lay near the hearth, her fur thick again, though the limp in her front leg never fully faded. She lifted her head occasionally to track Ethan's movements, her gaze calm and sure. By noon, Evelyn arrived, walking with the careful rhythm of age. Her figure had grown thinner, her steps slower, yet her presence carried the same quiet steadiness it always had. Her gray hair glimmered like frost beneath the sunlight. "You're at it again," she called from the gate. "That window's seen more love this month than I have in 20 years. Ethan smiled faintly, wiping his hands on his jeans, trying to make it last. She approached, her eyes following the line of the crack. "Some things last because we let them stay broken," she said softly. "Reminds us where the light gets in." He didn't reply. Instead, He gestured toward the small sign propped against the porch rail. Hand-carved, simple letters burned into the wood. Luna's Haven. Evelyn bent to read it more closely. "You really did it," she whispered, voice trembling. Ethan nodded. "It's official next week. The county's helping with the paperwork. A small rescue, just for dogs. But here's the part they didn't quite understand. It's not just for them." He led her around to the back, where the old shed had been converted into a modest kennel. Fresh straw lined the ground, and the air carried the scent of soap and cedar. Two elderly neighbors, a retired couple named Henry and June Weller, were inside, cleaning bowls. Henry was short and round, his white beard neatly trimmed, a former mechanic whose hands still bore faint stains of grease. June, tall and thin with auburn, hair fading to silver, wore a faded blue apron dotted with flower prints. They had lost their Labrador 2 winters ago and never adopted again, until Ethan found them volunteering here. June looked up and smiled. "Afternoon, Evelyn. We're just getting settled. These pups will be spoiled rotten by sundown." Evelyn chuckled, eyes softening. "That's the best kind of rescue." Ethan watched them work, quiet pride flickering beneath his usual reserve. "They'll help me take in older dogs, the kind people don't want, because they don't run as fast or hear as well anymore." He glanced toward Luna. "They'll stay here until we find them homes, or until they don't need one." Evelyn's gaze lingered on him. "And you?" He shrugged lightly. "Guess I'm staying here until I don't need one either." They walked back toward the porch as the sun began to dip. Evelyn sat on the step, her breath slightly unsteady. From her bag, she took out an envelope, cream paper, folded neatly, her handwriting slow but precise. "I was going to mail this," she said, handing it to him, "but it belongs here more than anywhere." He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, written in dark blue ink, every word deliberate. "Amelia once told me," it began, "that no creature is ever truly lost if someone waits by the window. She believed that the ones who leave don't vanish. They circle back when we've learned how to see them again. I think that's what Luna did, and maybe what you're doing now." The last line read simply, "Thank you for keeping my daughter's promise alive." When Ethan looked up, Evelyn was watching the horizon, her eyes glistening. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't. Words had never done justice to what survived between people, or between the living and the remembered. As the evening settled, the cabin filled with soft golden light. The smell of pine smoke drifted through the air, and the steady hum of the river joined it. A sound neither sorrowful nor happy, just eternal. Ethan stepped inside, setting the letter on the mantel. He touched the window pane once more. It was warm under his hand, holding the last heat of the sun. Luna rose slowly, her limp still visible, but her tail high, and crossed the room to press her head against his leg. Scout and Ivy joined her, their bodies forming a quiet tangle of fur and trust. Ethan sank to his knees beside them, the light spilling over all four like a benediction. For a long moment, no one moved. The fire crackled, the dogs breathed, and the wind brushed faintly against the cabin walls. Outside, the cracked glass caught the sunset just right, splitting it into amber shards that scattered across the floor. The same window that had once divided loneliness from compassion now reflected only light, soft and whole. In the end, this story isn't only about a soldier, a dog, or a small cabin in Montana. It's about the quiet ways in which grace still moves through our lives, through broken glass, through trembling hands, through the creatures that remind us we are never too lost to be found. Sometimes, God doesn't part the storm. He places a light in the window and waits for us to come home to it. And maybe the miracle isn't that Luna returned from the river, but that hearts frozen by guilt and grief can thaw. If only we stay open long enough for the warmth to reach us. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still believes that love, no matter how battered, can find its way back. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories of faith, mercy, and second chances. May God bless you, your home, and every soul that's still searching for its way through the storm.